Okay, the first thing I would say about what ISIS are doing is they are interpreting certain texts, and they're following a pathway of an individual called Muhammad, the founder of religion. They're trying to follow that pathway. Now, lots of Muslims today will say what they're doing isn't a legitimate outworking of either those texts or what Muhammad said, and others will say it is a legitimate outworking of what Muhammad said or what those texts say. That's a debate that's happening at the moment. And as a Christian, I'm interested in that debate, but I'm not going to particularly step in and pronounce on that. I'm not an expert Quranic scholar. When we come to the Old Testament, though, and we say, is there a parallel between the Battle of Jericho, for example, and what ISIS are doing? I think the firm answer is no, for a number of reasons. And I would give you 4 reasons, 4 things to think about if you're taking notes when it comes to war in the Old Testament. The first is the issue of language. Now, inevitably, when we read the Bible in translation, so we don't get all the nuance of the original. My sons are here today, so they might actually kill me afterwards for this, but if they've played a tennis match and won, which does occasionally happen, doesn't it, boys? If they've played a tennis match and won, they have been known to use hyperbole to describe what has happened. They might say something like, I'm over the moon, that I beat so-and-so. No, turn the camera off then. Or they might say, as happened yesterday when there was a tremendous rugby match and there was quite a battle and they won, they might say, we absolutely slaughtered them. Now, do my children think that they've literally jumped over the moon because they're so happy, and have they slaughtered the children of Chesham on the rugby field? No. There was not blood. Well, there was some blood on the floor, but not in that sense. Now, in our own language, we understand idiom, so we understand when rhetoric is being used. And when we read the Old Testament, about the Old Testament wars, there's certainly quite a lot of intentional ancient Near Eastern rhetoric being used. So, for example, Joshua says, we wiped them out. And then he goes on to say, the surviving people shouldn't intermarry, idol worshippers shouldn't intermarry with people who are worshipping the living God. He says, we utterly destroyed everything that breathed, but then says, we still need to struggle. There's still a battle over this bit, and we shouldn't intermarry. Do you see? We need to understand the way that language is used, and military rhetoric is really important now as it was then. The second thing to say is that these things occurred within a very limited time frame. So before Jesus, and even actually in the earlier part of the Old Testament, as people are struggling to find their home in a land, there are these God-sanctioned battles, but they occur within a limited time frame, and we're clearly told this is not to happen again. So limited time frame, language. And then the third thing I would say is the context of judgment. So I'm sure we'll talk about this again over the course of the day, but when we read the Bible, we read about a God of love who, because he is a God of love, is a God who judges evil. Now, some of us may feel uncomfortable about that, but I suggest to you this morning that if you have ever really experienced or know someone closely who's really experienced evil, perhaps someone who's experienced rape or some extreme violence, you will understand that loving that victim, loving someone who's been the victim of an extraordinary violation, to love them is to call for justice. And in the Old Testament, we meet the God of love, who is also the God who judges. He judges human traffickers. He judges people who oppress poor people. He judges perpetrators of domestic violence or sexual assault because he is good, because he is loving. And in the framework of the Bible, Old and New Testament, we see there are different means of God's judgment, and in a limited historical time period, one of those means was through war. And then the last thing I would say about Jericho specifically, again, it helps us to understand context. People think, this is like the city of London or something being wiped out. Actually, Jericho was a small garrison town. Most likely thing is that it was only combatants who were in that town apart from one person, a woman. Who knows her name? Rahab. Okay, Rahab. She is named in the account as the non-combatant. And what happened to her? The scarlet thread in her door, in her window, meant that Rahab and anyone who listened to her warning was delivered. Most likely she ran the garrison pub and possibly brothel. And that woman trusted in God and was delivered and is now named. And guess what? She makes it into the genealogy of Jesus. She's a great, whatever, mother of Jesus. So even in one of the most difficult to explain texts, we're not talking about millions of people being wiped out. We're talking about a small number of soldiers. Remember, Israel could go round that thing in seven times in one day. It's small numbers. And those who listened to the warning were delivered. Even there's grace. I think that's completely unlike ISIS.